Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome to another episode of Cooking in Quarantine. This episode we're going to make something really special, bread pakora. So here are the ingredients that we're going to use. So the ingredients that we're going to need today are green chilies. I've got a red onion and a white onion, so you're going to need 2 onions, garlic, tomatoes, gram flour, or as we say in Punjabi, besan, and some bread. This is homemade bread that I'm using today. As well as those ingredients, you might want a little bit of salt and various spices dependent on your taste. Bread pakora come in loads of different varieties. Some people just get like the slice of bread, put it in the besan mix, the batter, fry it and eat it like that. The way I like it is I like to get 2 slices of bread, put a filling in between like a sandwich, then coat it, then fry it, and then have a pakora that way. So the first thing we're going to do this episode is we're going to make the filling. Everyone's got their own favourite. You can adapt it to the way you want. I'm going to do a nice tomato base for the filling. So what I'm going to do, as you've seen, I've got the tomatoes, I've taken the white onion, I've put the red onion to the side for the time being, the garlic and the chilies. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to blend them all together, turn it into a nice paste. As you put it into the blender, you will need to cut them down a little bit just to make life easier for your blender. So cut them down into small pieces. And in regards to the garlic, you don't want a whole garlic in there unless you want it really garlicky. But I've just like 2 to 3 cloves. I'm just going to put in there. I'm putting in 3 cloves of garlic straight in there, and 3 green chilies. Again, I'm going to chop them a little bit just to help the blender. Might be easier just to break them rather than using a knife. What might happen, depending on how many tomatoes you're using, you might need to blend more than once. So put like all your main mix in one with a few tomatoes. It depends on the size of your blender. And then you can make another mix of just tomatoes and then mix it together afterwards in the pan. But I'm putting them all in now. As you can see, I'm blending away here. Add a little bit of water, a little bit of salt, and like I say, blend it to a paste. Once it's all blended, put the mixture into a pan and put it on to boil. Because there's a bit of water in there, you're going to need to let it reduce a little bit, let it thicken. As you can see, it's still quite wet. Like I say, if you want to add herbs, you want to add spices, you want to add various different things, you can do to this. Now, whilst this is on the boil, heat it up. Once it starts boiling, turn it down, let it simmer. Once it's done that, what you need to do is you take the red onion. If you don't want red onion, you can use white onion. You can even leave it like this, but I'm going to get some red onion. I'm just going to cut it up and add it straight into there after it's reduced down a little bit, so that you get a little bit of a crunch when you bite in. Once your tomato mixture has started to boil, like I say, keep stirring it, but then reduce the heat and let it simmer for a while. While it's simmering, you can leave it for 5 minutes or so just to reduce it a little bit, but you do need to keep an eye on it. Once it's started to fully boil, reduce the heat a little bit, let it simmer, let all the water that's in there evaporate. You want to thicken it up a bit, make it into sort of like a paste. Obviously, if you put a lot of water in, it's going to take a lot longer, so you'll need to boil it a lot more. At this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the chopped red onions that I mentioned earlier. As you can see, they're quite thick how I've chopped them up and broke them apart. So add that in there. It's going to give it a nice tomato and oniony flavour, the way I like it. But like I say, you can add different things to this. A lot of people use potato. mashed potato up, boil it, and then add various different herbs and spices to it and use that as a filling. But like I say, I'm doing this tomato paste today. As you can see, the water has started to boil away and it's starting to thicken up. Is this tomato saucy mix. So keep stirring it until it gets a lot thicker. Right, as you can see, it is now reduced down to a paste. I've turned the heat off. I'm still stirring it a bit. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it to cool. While it's cooling, we're not going to make a start on the second bit yet. You can do it if you want. You can start making the besan mix, the batter mix. I'm going to do that in a bit. I'm going to leave that to cool because it's really, really hot. Leave it for about 15 minutes or so. Really let it cool down because you don't want to be burning your hands when you're preparing, which means it gives us time to go and do some other things. My masterpiece. Right, okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to make the besan mix, the batter, whatever you call it. I'm just going to keep it nice and simple, very, very easy. So the gram flour that I mentioned earlier on, the besan, put it in a bowl. Yep, get it all in there. What I find using a whisk like this is easier to mix it all up. The only other thing you're going to need is water, but you're not going to put loads of water in at a time. Just put a little bit in. Start mixing it. And you're going to need to keep adding water as you're going along. Make sure you're getting everything in there. Don't leave any bits without any water, so you keep stirring it. As you can see, it starts to thicken as soon as you add water, but you need to keep adding water till you get the right consistency. Okay, too much water will make it runny and you're going to need more besan then. Right, as you can see, it's got to a bit of a thick consistency now, but there are some lumps, which is the reason why I'm using the whisk. Just beat all the lumps out, so you've got to keep stirring. Bit of a workout, this one, until you've got it right fine thickness. Maybe a little bit more thicker, but I think this is the right thickness. If your besan is too thin, what happens when you start frying the bread pakora? What will happen is the bread will soak up the besan and it'll soak up the oil that you're frying it in. That's why sometimes some bread pakora can be a bit oily. But if it's thicker and it coats the outside, it's going to less chance of oil soaking into your bread. The next thing we need for this is the most important part of a bread pakora is, of course, the bread. Now, I bake this bread at home, homemade bread. You can use shop bought bread if you want, but then obviously it's not babeki. If you have a bake, break your own bread. Cut it into slices. So I've cut the end piece off. I tend not to use the end piece. And with homemade bread, you can actually make it smaller than a normal loaf. So it's like the perfect size for a bread pakora. So they're just not too thick, 2 slices there. As you can see, they're really small because it's a small loaf that I've made. Perfect for this. What you can do is, if you want to make it a smaller bite-sized pakora, you can cut these in half. But for me, that's about the right size for the pakora. While you're preparing your bread and filling sandwiches, what I suggest is what you're going to need is some cooking oil to deep fry them. So I've put the oil on to heat because it needs to be really, really hot before you put them in. So turn the oil on, let it heat up really, really hot before you start putting the pakora in to fry. What you do now is you start spooning your mixture onto the bread. So you just put it on, spread it out, make sure you get some of those lovely onions in there. Spread it out like you would on a sandwich. Let's get a bit more down here on the bottom. So you've got a nice even spread. Then just seal your bread sandwich and it's ready to go in the batter. So you take your first sandwich now, put it in the batter mix, completely cover it. As you can see, it's completely covered. Get it all in there, the edges, everything. Your hands are going to get really messy doing this. Okay, it's fully soaked, and what you do, rather than just throwing it into the oil, you sort of place it in. So I'm going to move this bowl a bit close so I'm not dripping everything everywhere, and then from the side just sort of place it in and it'll start to fry. So it's in there now. As you can see, it's bubbling away, cooking. What you need to do is keep an eye on it. It's going to be golden brown. You need to turn it while it's cooking as well to make sure every bit is completely cooked. And as you can see, the one that was in first, the colour started to change. That's starting to turn a golden brown. And this one's still a bit light because it went in after. So keep turning, keep cooking until they're cooked all the way through. Right, so you can see it's bubbling away. This one looks ready to me. So take it out, drain a lot of the oil out as much as you can, and place it into a plate with absorbent paper, kitchen towel, kitchen roll, whatever you like to call it. So put it in there to let it soak up the oil and you're good to go. So the pakora have been made, as you can see, piping hot. You can have it on the side with a little bit of imli sauce or brown sauce, a bit of badina chutney, mint sauce with a bit of yogurt mix. You can have it with tomato sauce, but because there's already tomatoes in there, get maybe 2 tomatoey. Enjoy, brilliant snack to have. You can make them a bit bigger, take them for lunch. Hope you've enjoyed this episode of Cooking in Quarantine. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.